As the unprecedented scenes played out on live television, reactions flooded in from around the world. French President Emmanuel Macron expressed dismay at the attack on democracy.
When, in one of the world's oldest democracies, supporters of an incumbent president challenged the legitimate results of an election by force of arms, the universal idea of one man, one vote is being beaten.
Closer to home, Canada's Justin Trudeau tweeted,
Canadians are deeply disturbed and saddened by the attack on democracy in the United States, our closest ally and neighbour. Violence will never succeed in overruling the will of the people. Democracy in the US must be upheld, and it will be.
Turkey's Director of Communications, Fahrettin Altun, tweeted the country's support.
We maintain our belief that democracy in the USA will become operational as soon as possible, with all its institutions and practices.
Germany's Angela Merkel described the events as unsettling.
We all saw yesterday the unsettling pictures of the storming of the US Congress, and these pictures made me angry and also sad. I'm fairly convinced that I feel the same way as most of the friends of the United States, as many millions who admire the democratic traditions of the US.
China took the opportunity to condemn America's support for protesters in Hong Kong last year.
He said he wanted to rescue Hong Kong's people, to rescue them from oppression. I asked him to open his eyes to look at today's China and Hong Kong's people. We are living very well. Those who should be liberated and rescued are the US people.
Condemnation poured in from leaders in Spain, India, Holland, and Greece, as well as the EU and NATO. But even as they did, Trump supporters far and wide, from Tokyo to Vancouver, rallied to express their support for the outgoing U.S. president, a divisive figure continuing to divide even in the final days of his presidency. Obaida Hitto, TRT World.
Well, let's get more on the international reaction now with Omar Samad in Washington. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and also served as Afghanistan's ambassador to Canada, France and Belgium. Welcome to the program, Omar. Now, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said the rioting, quote, exposed the fragility and vulnerability of Western democracy. We know traditional American adversaries, such as Iran, have for years complained about America's alleged political adventurism abroad while ignoring its own democratic deficiencies. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it depends what kind of a political order you represent and how much democracy each of these international pundits and observers, world leaders have themselves within their own country, and what we may term as democratic systems and democratic orders. In some cases, is very strong, it's very deep-rooted, it's popular, it's legal, and within a constitutional order. And in some other cases, it's a mix. And obviously, we know that there are countries that pretend to be democratic, but really do not have, are very shallow in their democratic practices. So it very much depends on where you come from and what your views are about the US to begin with. So in the Iranian case, as you mentioned, obviously, there have been major tensions between the two countries, and they will use this moment to make a political statement.
Now, in Russia, another American adversary, the state-run news outlet RT published an editorial opinion piece suggesting that Washington was getting what it deserved as a result of its foreign interventions and policies overseas. Is that a fair statement for them to make?
So listen, I think that in the past, Western democracies and the US in particular, especially after the end of the Cold War, has brandished, the fact that they are the beacon of freedom and democracy and the will of the people and so on and so forth, human rights, gender rights, all of those values and the value systems that they represent. And so some countries do not like to be lectured or do not like to be told what to do, and others do, others don't mind. Some are forced in one way or the other. And I think that the Americans have at times used maybe excessive methods, and they themselves, in some cases, as has been proven in some countries, have probably undermined democratic rules and regulations and tenets. But at the same time, obviously, there are places where they have been able to move forward the agenda of democracy and human rights. It's a mixed bag. We can't really say that it's all good or all bad, or whether what the U.S. did in the past was all purposeful and they meant it and there was no hypocrisy, or that it wasn't. So it's a very mixed bag of things that have happened, at least over the last few decades.
And what's your view on American involvement in your home country, Afghanistan? We know that the US has sought to, I guess, implement democratic institutions in your country. Has that largely been welcomed? Do you welcome that involvement from the US?
Well, it's been 20 years since that project started. I personally was very much and still am very much in favor of a proper democratic order in any country, and Afghanistan being no exception. I am very much in favor of human rights, gender rights, but everything has to be done in accordance to laws, and laws should not just be on paper. They have to be practiced and they have to be put into practice. So a democratic system in Afghanistan has worked in some ways and it hasn't in other ways. It has moved forward and helped with progress in Afghanistan in some ways. But the problem with Afghanistan is very much a security issue. It's the continuation of war. It's the instability that it has brought and the impact it has had on democracy building in Afghanistan. So I hope Afghanistan will have a chance to go back to a much more honest way of building democracy and giving its people its rights and being inclusive and ending the war. So for that to happen, we really need to bring an end to the war in Afghanistan so we can focus on all of those values that the Afghans themselves have to embrace. Because if the Afghans don't embrace it, then obviously you're going to have problems like we see in America, where some people are not embracing the values that they have had for almost two centuries.
Okay, Omar Samad, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much again for joining us on the program.